Before I learned about two-way prayer, I was always really serious about my 12-step recovery. I got sober at 27, and I had some really good teachers and sponsors along the way. I worked my steps, I went to meetings, lots of them. And for a very long time, my recovery felt new and it felt exciting. But at about 20 years sober, I seemed to hit a wall. Is this all there is? Is this all I have to look forward to for the rest of my life? Looking back, I felt like I was ready for something new. But what I've learned was that in truth, I was ready for something old. There's a quote that I love from Carl Sandburg, and he said, "Whenever a society or a civilization fails, there's always one condition present. They forgot where they came from." I needed to change because my recovery had grown stale. So I started sharing my problem with people in the program, people who had found ways to keep it alive and exciting, ways to keep the juices flowing. I met a man in West Texas who had a lot more sobriety than I did at the time. And this guy told me a story. And looking back, I can see that that story really started the change that was going on within me. He said it was called the story of the 5 M's. And it's the story of nearly every spiritual institution, how they start, how they attract people, how they transform people, and then how so often they get stuck. So let me share this story with you. It's one of my favorites. Starts with the first M, and that is the man. And you got to forgive me because this was a West Texas story, ladies. So, just take that M and flip it around. All right? So it's a man who has a spiritual experience. He has a contact with the divine. It could be a man like Jesus. It could be Buddha. It could be Bill Wilson. And he has a transcendent experience. So for Jesus, it's the story of going into the Jordan at his baptism. And then a voice from the clouds, the story says, "Hey, this is my son. This is my beloved." For Buddha, it's sitting under the tree, stuck, not understanding the pain and the difficulties of life. How do you deal with that? Until finally, after a long, long time, he experiences enlightenment. For Bill Wilson, it's the 4th time that he was in detox within a year and a half. And he undergoes his white light or hot flash experience. He feels the presence of God. He has an encounter with the divine. So there's the man and the message. And what's the message? The message is who you are. And who you are ain't who you thought we were. The big book calls this the 4th dimension of existence. It's something new that's come into my life. The 3rd M is the movement. We call it in 12-step, this is a program of attraction. Because what I'm looking for, other people are looking for as well. And so what do we get? We get Jesus and the disciples. We get Buddha and his monks. We get Bill Wilson and the theoretical first 100. The 4th M, however, is when they try to organize the thing. They try to bring in the attorneys, bring in the secretaries, organize it so that the message is really clear. And if you follow the message the way we tell you to do it, you're okay. If you're going left of center or right of center, not so good. Okay? So this is the mechanized version of the program. This is where big book thumpers come in. This is where AA fundamentalists develop. This is where fundamentalists in the church develop. You're in if you believe this, you're out if you don't. All right? And what it does is it kills the spirit of the program. It becomes the monument or the mausoleum. It's dead. The vital juices that were there in the beginning are no longer flowing. And when I heard that story, I started to understand what was going on inside of me. That my program had become mechanical. Shortly after that, the universe responded to me again. This time I was in Oklahoma City. And I told some of the folks at another meeting what was going on inside of me. And they said, well, you know what, Bill? You really need to go and visit old Earl. And old Earl was an AA archivist. He was interested in the early history of Alcoholics Anonymous, how it had emerged from the Oxford group, how the early members, the pioneers he called them, how they got sober before the big book even existed, and certainly long before they had any 12 steps. So that night, I spent about 3 hours with Earl, and I never saw the man or talked to him again. But what he did for me that night was he took me through the 12 steps, not in the exact words that we've come to know them through our 12-step fellowships, but as that process existed, by and large, in the Oxford group. Sometimes I'll hear a preacher say, well, to understand this passage of Scripture, you really need to hear it in the original Greek. And I think what happened to me that night was Earl shared recovery, the process of recovery, in the original language of the Oxford group. Earl shared a quote with me from Bill Wilson that helped me understand just where the 12 steps came from. Wilson said, "Where did we learn about moral inventory, amends for harm done, turning our will and our lives over to God? Where did we learn about meditation and prayer and all the rest of it? The spiritual substance of our 10 remaining steps came straight from Dr. Bob's and my own early association with the Oxford groups." So again, to repeat, in the beginning, there were no steps. There weren't 6 steps, there weren't 10 steps, there were no steps. But what there was a set of principles and practices that Wilson experienced in the Oxford group, that Dr. Bob experienced in the Oxford group when he was in Akron, Ohio. And these Wilson took and codified and turned them into our 12 steps. Interestingly, Bill said that when he wrote the steps, he did it while doing two-way prayer, that it was guided. He was guided in that process. So I left Earl's house with a stack of books about the Oxford group. I studied everything that I could find out about them, what they believed, how they practiced their principles and their programs. And I kept coming across this strange practice that they called two-way prayer. They said receiving guidance from God and acting on that guidance, that was the key for finding what each of them had been searching for all of their lives. It seemed to fill that hole in the soul that most of us addicts know really, really well. So that sent me back to studying AA history, but from a different point of view, studying it not mechanically through the lens of the 12 steps, but through the lens of the pioneer's own practice before the steps were written. I came away from that study seeing the steps boil down into 3 simple words. And Dr. Bob said, keep it simple. And I don't know that it can be made any more simple than this. Connection, correction, direction. Connection, the first 3 steps. I can't, God can. I'm going to ask him if he would. That's how I connect with that power beyond myself. Correction. Everything that gets in the way of my relationship with God, of my relationship with other people, of my relationship with my true self, that needs to be corrected. So half of the steps are all about correcting what is wrong with that relationship. And then finally, direction. Steps 10, 11, and 12. These were not just maintenance steps, not for the pioneers. This was where the action was. This is where the juice was. This is where the process of being in relationship with the divine comes to new life. All right? And that's the thing that I was missing. So for the pioneers, the first 9 steps weren't meant to be done mechanically and repeated over and over and over again. That's what I was doing. I was, okay, I got to do another inventory. Okay, got to do another 3rd step. Got to do another 6th and 7th step. All right? What I wasn't doing was leading a guided life, a life with real meaning and purpose, God connected and God directed. And that was the thing that two-way prayer brought into my life. I read that the pioneers considered prayer and meditation more important than attending meetings. I remember when I first read that, and that certainly wasn't the way I had been taught. It sounded like heresy, and it came as a huge shock. And they weren't saying that meetings were not important, but they were saying that prayer and meditation was even more important. So let's turn now and do a quick review of some AA history. I want you to see how the program came to be built around this process that's called two-way prayer.